The Bible is being put back into schools, but not everyone is happy about it. Meanwhile, in Texas, our reading and math scores are embarrassingly low. But speaking of the Lone Star States, it is homecoming season, and have you seen the sizes of these mums? All that and more, it's time to spill some sweet tea. I'm back in the studio with Courtney Bagley, who is returning to the show, but with a new title. So her new role is Director of Education at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and you're working on curriculum for teachers and students to help our education in Texas. Before, I think our last conversation was about more about high school students and getting them real career training and set up after high school. Mm-hmm. Now your focus has shifted to the lower levels. First of all, how has that been going so far?
Well, it's very busy, very exciting, and very busy.
So what has been the biggest shift from working on specifically energy focused and like the career stuff versus like working, I guess, on more curriculum things now?
Well, there have been a lot of changes in Texas curriculum after last year House Bill 1605 passed, and it put in place some safeguards to make sure that our instructional materials are high quality. So now every textbook that's approved to go on the approved list has to pass a quality rubric, a suitability rubric, and it has to pass the TEKS review. So it not only has to be high quality for whatever the content is, it also has to be suitable for students, cannot violate any state laws, and then they have to make sure that all of the TEKS are met, which is a difference. Before, it was only 50% of the TEKS had to be present in a textbook, and now it's 100%. So
what
good,
they want
exciting
is Texas
changes.
wants people to actually learn during in their curriculum.
Yeah,
and
I think the rationale for it being 50% was that teachers usually have to, teachers usually choose to use a variety of resources. And so one may be good, but not have everything in it. And so you might have to get a different resource for the rest of the TEKS. But they've decided that that's not probably the best thing. And so we're back to 100%, which is how it should have been.
And remind me, how many years were you a teacher in the classroom? 20?
20 years, yeah.
So this is something I want to pivot to a little bit. In those 20 years, I'm sure that you saw the size of mums that people wore for homecoming grow.
Yes.
Okay, what is your point of view on the evolution of Texas moms in the homecoming season?
I love it. For a lot of years, I had my mom's from high school. She kept it in a scrapbook, and it was actually a giant white chrysanthemum. And then a few years ago, she gave me, I don't even remember this, but my grandfather had gotten me a mum, and she had saved the ribbon, and it had my name on it in glitter, but it was just a little ribbon with glitter that used to have a flower on it. But
how big were those, like, whenever you were still in high
it was
school?
a spider mum, right? So the spider mums would be about this big with, just a simple ribbon coming off of it.
So was that like taking up like maybe like half the torso?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think my mom was saying like back in the 80s, it was like an even smaller one and just like, something that you could pin on your dress.
Yes, it was manageable.
Yeah.
It was very
Honestly,
manageable.
Seeing the way that people are trying to manage them is hilarious.
Yeah.
So usually I feel like we've just been seeing like the stuff that's been coming up on Instagram is just larger and larger. And I think it was in high school that I started seeing people put lights and stuffed animals onto them.
Some of them have sound.
Yes, yeah, getting all your senses involved now.
Exactly.
But it was so funny when you started having to see girls wear these chains to hold them up around their necks.
Yes, they do.
But the weird thing was, actually, let me first cut to a video of a homecoming parade where you're going to see a lot of students walking with their mums that kind of fit the description that we even saw last year with these like just gigantic mums on Instagram. So take a look at this.
Now you're just showing off. I can't believe my eyes. I can't believe my eyes. Now you're just showing off. I can't believe my eyes. Don't stop. Now you're just showing off. I see you. I see you.
So what you just saw was like a sea of ribbon and flowers and feathers and the whole thing.
Yep.
So you saw that even whenever you were a teacher, right?
Oh, yes, that looks very familiar.
Yeah, and wait, were you saying that there were like, I think you had mentioned just like students' reactions to getting mums and stuff. What are some of the complications that you saw?
Well, it was always very sad when a young gentleman purchased a mum for a young lady, and I mean these things they can be $200 or $300. They are not cheap. And then she didn't like a color on it, or the charm wasn't right, or she wanted more lights. And I'm just like, poor boy. I mean, he spent $200. His mother was probably hot gluing the thing together all night. So yeah, it's sad. The boys put it all out there and, have to risk it all for love, I guess.
Just to risk it all.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the boys still will usually get one back from the girls, like the giant garters that just take
Yeah.
up their entire arm.
Yep.
But even that is just not the same thing as like the gigantic ones that we're seeing. But it seems like now that it seems like you cannot physically get any larger because they're already like double the width of the person
Right.
wearing them. I want to now show you and everyone else, we're going to look at a video now of people getting creative with the shape and the design of the mums now. So take a look at this one. So that was new.
Wow.
Have you seen something like that before?
I have not seen something like that. I don't even know how you sit in the chair. How do you get in the desk?
I don't know if that's the point of them.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
don't
like
think
if that's
so.
what you're thinking of, you don't get mums.
I must be on the wrong train of thought.
So one of the girls in the picture, she had like the Texas mum
Yeah.
with different things. I have seen the Texas shape and stuff before.
Yes, I have seen that.
I've not seen an eagle,
No,
however.
no.
I mean, do you feel like it's at least patriotic?
It's patriotic. We won't think the practicality of it, but yeah, I bet in the stands at the football game it gets in the way.
Oh, yeah, that too. And that's really where it can show
Yeah.
up. Unless you're doing the parade, I guess I can just make some room
Yeah,
around you.
yeah.
Well, good luck to her date, whoever is standing next to her this year. So let's go jump back to the other parts of the classroom. So
Yeah.
obviously dealing with mums and having your students sit while you're teaching is not the only difficult
Yeah.
things. The curriculum is part of it. And your work before did focus on like the high school students, really
Right.
setting them up for success afterwards. Why do you think it's important now to focus in on the lower levels of education in some of the areas where they're struggling?
Well, our test scores, even before COVID, showed that less than 50% of our students were proficient in reading in grade 3. And that's not just a Texas issue, it is a nationwide concern. But Texas just took a brave step to try to resolve the problem. With House Bill 1605, there are some open education resources that are being created, and these are K through 5 reading materials. There are
Actually, will you explain what an open education resource
Yeah.
is and why that's different than something
So
else?
all it means is that it's open and available for public use. I've taught online courses before for students who are international, students who are in private schools, and books may not be affordable to them. And so open education resources allows anybody to access instructional materials like textbooks. So it really does level the playing field and give students a lot more options who may be, for example, financially unable to purchase textbooks.
And was that not the case before with education materials?
What do you mean?
So like we're seeing like the word open education resources. I guess this is just the first time I'm hearing about
yeah,
them. Is
so
it because they're
no, they've
expanding
been around.
it? Or?
Open education resources have been around a long time. You may have heard of Creative Commons. Like that's another type of open education resource. All it means is there's not a copyright on it and anyone is free to use it. So they created these open education resources that districts can adopt, hopefully, because it's still in the process of being reviewed and they haven't had a final vote on it yet. But the open education resources that the state of Texas has produced is really quite amazing. There are 2 strands for each grade level. One is a strand to learn how to read through phonics-based instruction, which was mandated in House Bill 1605. And then the second strand is reading and stories that correlate with other content that they're learning in their other subject areas. So, for example, in 4th grade science, students will read about Texas energy, all of it from Spindletop to Houston and what that looks like today. And with that, they will write an argumentative essay where they have to choose an energy source for a particular scenario and write about why that would be the best source for that particular situation. They also are going to be reading about heroes like Dolly Madison, who saved Washington's portrait when the White House burned down during the War of 1812. Texas heroes like Hector Garcia. It really is just hearkening back to some of those classically inspired virtue traits, the classics, ancient Rome, a lot of really good, thought-provoking, content-rich materials for students to read and have access to.
So what's the thought behind incorporating reading and literature into these other subject areas?
Well, the point of it is that if students have some kind of background or understanding, then they sort of have a hook in their mind to hang knowledge and information on. And, one of the things that we find in our culture today or in our society is that we are culturally illiterate, and we don't understand a lot of things about the background and history and how we got to be where we are today. Simple idioms. It's not in the OER, but I'll give you an example. Like "Ring Around the Rosie" comes from the Middle Ages, and it's a nursery rhyme, but it really is telling the story of the Black Death and the plague that took Europe during the Middle Ages. So having these open education resources, students will be exposed to things like that to really understand who they are as Texans, how we got here, why they should be proud to be Americans, and all of those things that we want our students to know.
So I've been hearing a lot of talk around this area, and this is outside of the policy realm, but I'm just hearing people say they're trying to force the Bible on kids and they just want to teach their religion.
Yeah.
Where is that idea coming from, and where does the truth lie in that?
Well, there are Bible stories, but it's not proselytizing, right? We're not asking anybody, to walk an aisle or anything like that. It's really just teaching students things like what the Good Samaritan is, that there are Good Samaritan laws, right? And we want people to help each other. So what is the golden rule? What is a Good Samaritan? And those kinds of things. They really are very culturally relevant to our students. And, it kind of floors me that we're getting that there is so much pushback from on the religious aspect. We talk about bullying all the time. So what's wrong with teaching kids to treat people how you want to be treated with the golden rule, or how to help someone who is in need like it is with the Good Samaritan? And there are other stories. Students will be exposed to Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. And this is another one that's received a lot of attention. Martin Luther King, there is a lot of religious reference in that letter, but Martin Luther King is writing that letter from a jail, and when you read the references, they are also about people who are in jail. And so, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in the fiery furnace because they would not do what the king said. Paul, the apostle, it's not, this isn't in the OER, but, Paul said, to live is Christ and to die is gain. I mean, he was sold out for his belief, and he would die for it. And when you understand the background of these stories, then you can read that letter with a whole new appreciation. What was it that Martin Luther King Jr. was saying? He was willing to die like the Old Testament prophets, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like the Apostle Paul, for what he believed in. And that's really the richness that we want students to be exposed to, so that when they read literature, or when they read the letter from Birmingham jail, or when they're watching TV, at the Olympics, there was the whole thing about the Last Supper painting. And if you don't know what the Last Supper painting is, you've never seen it, you don't know what it represents, the significance of it from the Renaissance, then you really can't appreciate that argument and debate that happened last summer. So these things are all around us. We talk about them every day. It's part of our background, our history, and it really is just helping students get that cultural literacy and cultural understanding so that they can go into the world and really be literate.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it.
Well, it's interesting because you first draw the point to how it connects to being able to understand American literature and history,
Right.
and those kinds of things that you're using in academics. But then like that later point of this is how we participate in our culture. This is how you become a member of our American society and have those kinds of like slogans, like you were saying, the Good Samaritan laws. So it's how we participate in those civics, but then even just relate to other people. So
Yep.
there was an article that you sent me from Robert Pondesio. The article is entitled "The Case for Texas's New Curriculum: Why Bible Stories Matter for Literacy." And in this article, there's one quote that stood out to me where he says, "Words, phrases, and ideas from history, literature, mythology, and yes, the Bible, form the bedrock of much of English speakers' linguistic heritage. Without complete command of these references, students, particularly poor minority and immigrant students will struggle to fully comprehend what they read, no matter how well they decode the words on the page.
Yep.
So, like, if we want students to be able to have real reading comprehension skills, it makes sense that they need to have the context to be able to
Yeah, I
comprehend
think
it.
that point that you brought out, Ariana, is so important because, you know, a lot of us were blessed and our moms and dads, our grandparents read to us growing up. And that does give us an advantage if we are read to when we're young. That's why, I mean, even in kindergarten, first, second grade, I remember teachers reading to us in class. And this is where a lot of this cultural literacy is developed. What happens to students who don't have the exposure? They fall behind, and it also impacts their test scores. So it really is about, you know, creating that level playing field so that all of our students have a really rich understanding of our world.
Yeah, and the article also gives some examples of, like what you were saying, religious references that we just use colloquially. So things like Good Samaritan, Prodigal Son, Forbidden Fruit,
Yep.
Pearls Before Swine, and just those are just things that we say like whenever we're speaking to
Right.
each other.
Right.
So the fact that there are kids who are at risk of not being able to participate in those kinds of conversations is, well, it's embarrassing for Texas that we have that.
Yeah. It's really, I mean, these stories are so rich and amazing. There's a story about Queen Esther, who is a Hebrew queen.
I love her.
In
That's
the-
my favorite story.
In the Old Testament. It comes from a book of the Bible that the word God isn't, I mean, I don't even think the word God is in the book of Esther. But it's a wonderful story about a woman, a female, who helped and saved and rescued her people. And we have this phrase that we use, you are called for a time as this. Well, that comes from the story of Esther. And understanding and knowing that story, when you hear it, it just has a whole new meaning and a deeper appreciation when people reference that phrase.
Something that's pretty interesting about this new curriculum, and you had touched on it a little bit, is that it seems like there's at least a little bit of classical inspiration.
Yeah.
So a few weeks ago, we had America Stevens on the show, and she was raised, she was homeschooled and really had a classical background to her education. And what you're speaking about sounds a little bit like this. Is what is being proposed a classical education for students?
I wouldn't say classical in the classical sense. I would say it's classically inspired. It's stories of heroes and virtue. Things that students can really, things that they can be empowered to pursue. Kids love stories of heroes. I mean, Superman, Spider-Man, you know, Iron Man, all of them. That is what kids are drawn to. And so these stories, many of them are real life heroes, people that did amazing things. And I think that's something that's been lost in the conversation because the biblical stories have taken such a front seat, is that we have amazing stories about Texas, about Texans, about Americans, and even heroes from around the world, from ancient times all the way up to the 20th century. So students can really, their imaginations can be captured, and they can have something to aspire to, which I think is just so needed today. So much of their media on Netflix has such a negative, dark tone. It's time for us to really bring back an inspiration for students. And I'm really excited about what these open education resources have the potential to offer.
So we touched on how this is going to impact students and hopefully, again, increase literacy rates, make students be inspired to be Americans and care about things like civil virtue. How does this impact teachers in the way that they interact in their classrooms?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things that they have said as a critique of it is that there's a script that teachers have to read. And that's really not what it is, okay? Every good lesson plan has instructions, and it has guidance, and it has sample questions and prompts to ask students to get them engaged. This is nothing new. What this open education resource offers, though, is a really rich environment, especially for young teachers to be able to master their craft. One of the biggest issues that we see today is that teachers do not stay in the classroom very long. And so we have a lot of young, inexperienced teachers. And when they're going through their teaching college experience, They may get one class in reading. And that's it. They are not experts in any of these areas, reading, math, history. And so coming into a classroom where the lessons are laid out in this orderly, organized fashion that offers you opportunities to differentiate instruction. They give you instructions for how to deal with students who are English language learners. And the thing I really love about these products is that they have a lot of background information for teachers. So they're explaining not only what to do, but the rationale as to why they're doing it. It really is.
That's a whole new
I mean, it's
component that it's
over
providing.
100,000 pages of instructional materials K through 5. And it's very impressive. There's been so much thought put into this. It's been piloted in all over the state since COVID. It was bought as an emergency product during COVID. And since then, because of the results, they've been Texifying it, making sure it had Texas values in it and those types of things. So it's just really exciting.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of teachers will have to kind of build their own set of curriculum and put together their lesson plan and try to find ways to pull it from other places. Does this help solve some of that issue, that the stress that they have?
I've shown you some of those things.
Well, I've seen some of the poor examples of what's provided online.
Right. And you know what it is, teachers will look at something and they will purchase it maybe off of Teachers Pay Teachers, or they'll get it off Pinterest, and they see that it covers the TEKS, right? They can look it up and see what TEKS it covers. And so they'll think it's a good product to use. But when you do the Lexile tests and things like that to check reading level, what we often find is that they are woefully inadequate at lifting our students up to the level that they need to be.
And I mean, how much stress and additional work is that on teachers when they're building out their own curriculum and learning on the job whenever they're just starting?
It's a lot, and it's overwhelming. And this is one of the reasons why teachers leave the classroom. So hopefully teachers will have the opportunity to use these instructional materials, become experts at literacy from it, and be empowered to stay in the classroom.
So when can teachers start getting access to these new materials?
So they're online right now. Anybody can look at them and review them. All you have to do is Google, Texas Gateway Open Education Resources, and K through 5, it'll pop up for you. But the State Board of Education has to make a decision whether or not to adopt these. So the first reading happened last month, and there will be a final reading and vote on approving these and other reading materials in November. So at that point, it will be available to districts to adopt and use.
That's in November?
Yep, in November.
That's awesome.
Right
How often
before
are
Thanksgiving.
they? Yeah, sorry to keep thinking too far in the future, but how often are they? How long has it been since they've been revised, and how does that process usually work?
I'm not sure how long it's been. It's been an 8-year cycle.
Okay.
But usually it ends up after you rewrite the TEKS and get the textbooks, it usually ends up being closer to 10 years. So it's been a while since the TEKS have been updated. Right. But with House Bill 1605, I hate to keep saying it, but it was such a big bill. But they require phonics teaching now. So this is something that is going to be required of every teacher in the state of Texas, K through 5, to teach reading through phonics.
And so hopefully we'll be able to see that change in the next time we do polling after these are implemented,
yeah.
right? So I just want to know, to wrap this up, what of the news stories that's in these new resources is your favorite and the most inspiring to you?
Well, I really do love the story of the War of 1812 because it's kind of a war that kids may not ever be exposed to, especially in, lower grade levels. But that story of Dolly Madison rescuing the portrait from the White House, and the story of Francis Scott Key writing the national anthem there at the end of the battle. I just think those are some great stories. They're exciting and they're fun, and they're written in a way where a student can really grasp the spirit of the time that it was, that it happened in.
Right. That's awesome. I think for me, from just the ones that I've heard of so far, it has to still be the story of Queen Esther and being called to. And I feel like that's something that at the Texas Public Policy Foundation that we all believe in and are practicing, which is that we're called for a time such as this.
Yep.
So thank you so much, Courtney, for coming
Yeah.
in, explaining all this, reacting to the crazy mums with me.
Yeah, it's that season, right?
Oh,
when
yeah.
you go to Hobby Lobby, that's all you see is like all the streamers and the flowers and all the stuff.
Yeah, a little bit overwhelming, but I feel like I definitely have a few years before I have to deal with that again.
Yeah, well, you should go to a football game on a homecoming football game.
I should, especially now that we're like kind of out a little closer to the country, so to see one of the local ones.
Yeah.
I'll try to do that this year.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Courtney. For everyone else, if you want to learn more about this, you can go to texaspublicpolicy.com, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.